How responsible are we for our own health? There's a question I keep coming back to when I think about health, not in theory, but in real life, where decisions get delayed and small problems quietly become bigger ones. How responsible are we really for our own health and well being? Not as a moral judgment, not as a question of blame, but I mean it in a practical sense, a lived sense. What belongs to us as patients and what belongs to the system? Because the way we answer that question shapes almost everything that follows: how early problems get noticed, how conversations unfold, and how much room there is to act before something becomes urgent. For most of modern healthcare, the arrangement has been fairly clear. Something feels off, so you schedule an appointment. A professional evaluates the situation, a decision is made, and you follow instructions. And for acute problems, that works extremely well. If you break a bone, you don't need interpretation as much as you need an x ray and a cast. But most health issues don't show up that cleanly, and most of the decisions that shape long term health aren't made in moments of crisis. Once you move beyond emergencies, the role each of us plays starts to change. Showing up to an appointment feels like participation, but participation is something else entirely. Participation means noticing patterns over time, remembering when something changed, not just that it did, and paying attention to what helps and what quietly doesn't. Not as a substitute for expertise, but as context. Because no clinician lives inside your body, they see moments, you live continuity, and decisions are only as good as the information they're based on. For a lot of people, that shift from compliance to participation feels unfamiliar. We've been trained to be compliant, not collaborative. We answer questions, we don't ask them. We assume that if something mattered, someone else would bring it up. Over time, that creates a quiet habit of passivity. Not because people don't care, but because they've learned that caring out loud feels like overstepping. There's a subtle fear there of being seen as difficult or anxious or uninformed, so people stay quiet, and silence slowly gets mistaken for simplicity. That raises a harder question. If that context doesn't come from you, where does it come from? There's a quiet assumption in healthcare that responsibility and authority have to live in the same place. They don't. A clinician's role is to interpret information, weigh risk, and guide decisions. That work improves when the input is clearer and more complete. The point isn't to replace expertise, it's to bring information into the room that no one else has. That collaboration shows up in small, practical ways: clarifying timelines, explaining patterns, asking what a recommendation is actually optimizing for. Because health rarely fails all at once, it changes slowly. And when those changes go unnoticed, decisions start getting made later than they should. That's where norms begin to matter more than we realize. Modern medicine is very good at defining norms, reference ranges, thresholds, cutoffs. The tools are necessary, but they are never meant to describe what's ideal. Normal doesn't mean optimal, it often means common. Optimization isn't about chasing perfection, it's about noticing signals before they become problems. Energy may drop, sleep quality may shift, recovery may be slower. Those aren't diagnoses, they're information, and information only matters if someone is listening. So, where does responsibility actually begin? We're not responsible for everything that happens to our bodies. Genetics matter, environment matters, and access matters, but we are responsible for engagement. We are responsible for paying attention, for staying curious, for remaining present in decisions that affect us. Responsibility isn't about control, it's about stewardship, and stewardship is often misunderstood. Control implies certainty. Stewardship allows for uncertainty. It doesn't require you to know the right answer. It requires you to stay engaged long enough to notice when a question needs to be asked. That's a different posture, and it's one most people were never taught to adopt when it comes to their own health. The mistake isn't trusting experts. The mistake is disappearing from the conversation entirely. Because healthcare works best not when responsibility is perfectly assigned, but when curiosity is shared. And once curiosity becomes part of the process, decisions change, conversations change, and timing changes. So maybe the better question isn't how much responsibility we carry. Maybe it's what kind of participant we choose to be: passive, reactive, or thoughtfully engaged. Because healthcare works best not when responsibility is perfectly assigned, but when curiosity is shared. And once curiosity becomes part of the process, decisions change, conversations change, and timing changes. So maybe the better question isn't how much responsibility we carry. Maybe it's what kind of participant we choose to be: passive, reactive, or are we thoughtfully engaged? Because that choice shapes not just outcomes, but how early we notice what matters. This is uncommonly remarkable. Thanks for listening.